Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pink and Preview show, where this week we're looking ahead to Norwich City's meeting with Bristol City at Carrow Road. Of course, an international break, so the first game in a couple of weeks, an opportunity for Norwich to set things right after an East Anglian derby defeat last time out. It's been a long time since we've been at Carrow Road, Paddy. It feels like probably we could have done one of these shows even if there wasn't a game for us to talk about this weekend, because it's been, certainly in terms of the mood and the discussion points, it's been one of those busy international breaks where there has been a lot to talk about. So hopefully we can fill Charlie with some hope over the next 45 minutes or so. But if we start with kind of the events of the last couple of weeks, it feels like probably, even though things were already quite difficult on the pitch, matters off the pitch won't have helped the feeling going into the game this weekend.
No, Sam, no. And I think you're probably referring to, although we wasn't present because we were doing a Spaces on our Pink and X channel Wednesday evening. Connor was there, but every external sort of detached view of that public meeting for the Carrow Road revamp plan, with two of the executive there fielding questions, went. Let's just say that I don't think that everybody left that meeting on the same page at the Lion Castle, and that's being diplomatic. It sounds like it was quite a frustration, angry exchange. Did nothing to maybe assuage the concerns of a lot of those affected season ticket holders around the vision that the club have now for Carrow Road, short-term, mid-term, long-term. And as a result, you can see the reaction post events on Wednesday evening, just on social media, that it's certainly not putting things back together, which is my sense of where this club is at the minute. Very fractured, very riven with division. Not any part of this club you would feel is functioning as it needs to on or off the pitch at the minute. And, you know, Liam Manning, feel sorry for him on one level, because all of that element, certainly in terms of what's happening off the pitch, isn't of his making, but very much what is, you know, 8 points from 9 championship games going into this international period. And that's why, you know, if we narrow the focus certainly to events this weekend and Bristol City, his old club at Carrow Road, it feels like the start of a big period for him and this squad, because that cannot continue. Where they are in terms of on the pitch can't continue. But I guess maybe this week has underline that it isn't in isolation, you know, and we got into that in that Spaces we did, you know, for that hour midweek, that it feels bigger than simply Liam Manning in post, out of post, maybe even Ben Knapper in post, out of post. It feels there's almost a, you know, an existential element around where are this football club going, what are they trying to do, what are they striving to do, are they bringing supporters on that journey, are they listening to supporters, you know. There's so many elements of this now that isn't purely about Liam Manning and him having to win a game tomorrow at Carrow Road, but that is the next attempt to try and lift the gloom. And as he said, you know, when we spoke to him at Colney on Wednesday, that the whole energy around the club and the whole sense that it is, you know, on the back foot, that can change with results. And, you know, it's the Dean Smith mannerism about, you know, sticking plasters, and whether that would deal with maybe some of those off the field issues, probably not. But at least in the very, very short term, they go into now Bristol at home, Derby away, Swansea away. If we get through that little phase and they've got points on the board, they're winning games of football, there's more sense of a style of play that you can see that the players are buying into, that is proving effective, not just performances, but results, then okay, it won't solve all the ills, but it will feel a brighter place if you've got anything to do with Norwich City. And that has to be the hope if you're Liam Manning going into this weekend. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's one of those situations where, you know, the off-pitch things are playing into the feelings on the pitch. And it's funny you referenced that Dean Smith period, because it feels to me like the first time in probably since then when there's been almost equal levels of discontent with both the management team, the players, what's going on the pitch, and sort of the board of directors, some of the commercial decisions. And I think you look at what's happened, certainly for me, looking at the way that they messaged that change, particularly to the fans in the River End, and you know how that would affect those supporters. I don't think it would have been popular in any environment, but certainly it was even less popular, I think, because of the results that happened leading into it. Obviously, this meeting then happened, 9-10 days after losing to Ipswich for the first time in 16 years. So it feels almost like one thing is playing into the other at the moment. And as you said, even though none of those decisions are taken by Liam Manning or involving Liam Manning, it feels like they've heaped the pressure on him a little bit. So does it feel to you like this game this weekend, there's a bit more pressure to almost start quickly, because you can see a scenario where if Bristol City go up in the first 20, 30 minutes, the crowd is probably going to turn. They're going to show their frustrations, not only with how things are going in that game, but, over the last few weeks on the pitch, and also probably with what's happened off the pitch as well. So it does feel, doesn't it, like Norwich can't really afford to have that moment where they give, fans the chance to almost show their frustration in the early parts of the game.
Yeah, and I think Liam Manning will understand that is what's in play here, because they haven't delivered. Carrow Road, 5 competitive games, 1 in the league, League Cup, 4 in the league, not a win in sight, and also the way that they seemingly haven't developed a style of play which gives you any confidence. Even if the results were lagging a little bit, if you could see what they were trying to do, for me, that's around midfield areas. We've spoken liberally on various platforms about that, because through that you get control. You get control of the ball, you get control of territory and possession. It's not a given that then translates into winning games of football, but it feels to me, stating the obvious, that you're going to have a better chance if you're dictating the flow of a game, and it's maybe the game's been played more towards the opponent's penalty area than your penalty area, which we've seen too often at Carrow. We've certainly seen that away. My mind goes back to Coventry, to Stoke, even periods against Portsmouth and Blackburn where it's almost clinging on for dear life through gritted teeth. That's not sustainable, clearly, and it certainly isn't a template to get this group of players and this head coach competing for the top 6. I mean, that's laughable at this stage, because we haven't seen enough evidence to have any confidence in making a statement like that, even though we know before a ball was kicked. I saw one comment we just pushed through there about the whole Johannes thing, and the benchmark for him was you're falling below this top 6 expectancy. That remains what Liam Manning will be judged by ultimately in the longer term. But it is 9 games in. It is a 46-game season. That is true. Things can change. Things can change in the shorter period with the congested nature of what we're going into now, between now and the next international break. But yeah, sadly, that ship has sailed, I think, for Gary. But there's no doubt tomorrow does feel big, because, as you rightly say, it's the mood around the place. It's fractious. It's frustration. It's just under the surface. We've seen it burst in terms of the Carrow Road environment. Wrexham 3 goals in 13 minutes at the start of that second half, and that headed south in terms of the mood around the place. And then even West Brom, which was, to my mind, a better performance. You could argue how good or bad were West Brom. They subsequently went, I think, to Millwall, wasn't it? Got hammered. So maybe they're not a great benchmark either. But nevertheless, that was a game Norwich should have got something from. Poor finishing from them, some decent goalkeeping from the West Brom lad, and they walk off that pitch to more boos. So against that backdrop, to take your thread there, Sam, if they fall behind tomorrow, then you do fear the worst. You fear the worst in terms of the mood inside the stadium, how that will then translate into the vocal levels of negativity directed at the players and Liam Manning, and maybe even now those sitting in those padded seats as well, off the back of this Carrow Road revamped delivery farce. So, for a lot of reasons, you hope it goes well tomorrow. I hope on a human level it goes well for Liam Manning, but I think we all have to expect that if Bristol, continue this regressive trend at Carrow Road, then the reaction will reflect that, and it won't be a positive experience for anybody connected with Norwich.
Indeed. I just saw this comment from Nick, and I wanted to ask you about it, because it's a thread I've seen coming up regularly across sort of socials and among Norwich fans. He says Manning's consistent, look what we did at Bristol messaging. They made it into the playoffs and got smashed in the semi-final, which is basically what David Wagner did, and then got fired, obviously, the very morning after they lost 4-0 in the second leg of that playoff semi-final against Leeds. I mean, he has talked a lot about his time at Bristol City, obviously particularly pertinent going into this weekend and a reunion with them. I suppose, to be fair to him, you can see why he's going back to those times, because Bristol City, he did start pretty poorly. They turned things around eventually. Same theme at Oxford United. So you can see why he's turning to those sort of situations and those examples for a bit of comfort. But for our Terrace Talk episode, which people can go and watch on this YouTube channel, I spoke to a Bristol City fan who said it doesn't actually look that similar to maybe what it did at times at Bristol City and kind of those struggles. So I wanted to ask you how much comfort, if you were Liam Manning, you would be taking from those periods, because yes, they look similar in some senses, but Norwich, I think they were 19th in the Championship the last time I checked. They're probably, they definitely are the biggest club Manning has managed yet in his career. Do you think he's kind of taking too much comfort from that and almost looking at that a bit too much in the same way that Wagner did with his playoff success at Huddersfield? Or do you look at those periods and go, yeah, actually, this is what's happened before, and there are signs that he will be able to turn things around at Norwich?
I just punched up a quote there. I'm assuming we've got one or two Bristol fans joining us today as well, and they're better qualified than us to reflect on his Bristol period in terms of the entirety of that tenure. I mean, we obviously only see, well, certainly from a Norwich perspective, that maybe the 2 games last season when he did the double over that Johannes team and elements of maybe what you saw at the first half at Portman Road, that high press, that intensity, turning the ball over and getting chances off the back of that. And from everything I've read and consumed around Liam Manning and Bristol last season, that was the back end of the sort of what carried them into the playoffs, really, that almost counter-punching style. Now, my fear all along is, can you replicate that with Norwich? Because particularly at Carrow Road, but even to take Ben Knapper's train, more broadly in the Championship, Norwich are expected to be the protagonists, to be the aggressors, to be on the front foot rather than maybe inviting teams onto them or trying to turn teams over who have more possession and territory. That to me is slightly a different way that Norwich have tried to go about it in the Championship in the post sort of Parker era, certainly. But yeah, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. The parallel with Wagner, that I think it's safe to say Sheffield United cruised through those 2 playoff games. So in that sense, that wasn't good enough for Ben Knapper in terms of David Wagner's ceiling. But seemingly it was not something that put off Ben Knapper from going and turning to Liam Manning. And we can only go back to the original statements around his unveiling that in Liam Manning, Ben Knapper and the power brokers at Norwich see a coach who has all those other career steps that we've touched on, MK and Oxford and latterly Bristol, has extracted more from maybe the availability of resource he's had. In other words, his coaching ability has lifted maybe the ceiling of what the group of players he was working with. Now, the hope would have been off the back of that epic transfer window in terms of volume of players that they brought in, but clearly from a Norwich perspective, they would have hoped they've added extra quality to the quality that was already in that group. As bad as it finished under Torup, you're not telling me pound for pound Josh Sargent isn't the best striker in this division. There's good young players there who feel that they have, again, a potential to be better than Championship grade. So you then bring in a head coach who is a developer, who is an improver, who has a track record for that, and you're giving him, in theory, a better grade of player, then that's maybe where Ben Knapper's coming at in terms of why Liam Manning. 9 games in, that's clearly hasn't translated into that expectation. And if anything, worryingly, and I'll use him as a case study rather than to single him out, Antti Cernach seems to be getting worse, not better, based on his productivity last season. So that's a concern. Jurasek was still waiting for him to show something on a consistent basis. Now, seemingly, it looks like the fitness element is off the table, and that he is, in terms of his ability to handle the load from week to week, training-wise, but also game-wise. The fact he's in contention, he's making squads, he's getting on the pitch now, but we haven't really seen, in terms of now he's on the pitch, him showing what we were told he was when he came through the door originally. So Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think that's probably a fair criticism that, this kind of leaning into his Bristol experience to then charter, well, it'll be okay at Norwich because I did this at Bristol. I think that's probably wearing thin already, if we're honest, and that probably was only going to give him an initial leeway amongst the fan base. But plenty of Bristol fans would tell you that don't be fooled by the fact that he got them into the top six. It was a pretty low bar if you look at points to get in the top six last season. So maybe that achievement shouldn't be put on the pedestal that it has been to this point. I mean, the reality is, irrespective, I mean, as he quoted again midweek, he's spoken to the Norwich players, of this international period and said, words to the effect again, this time last season, Bristol City sat on 11 points and they got in the playoffs. That's all well and good, but, this, as you rightly said, Sam, is a much bigger test of his coaching credentials. The expectation is greater. And that is why, let's be honest, he's left a team who we got into the top six, who you would think are looking at pound for pound in the here and now, and maybe better geared to have a crack at repeating that. Yet he walked away from that at Bristol to come to Norwich because he clearly viewed Norwich as a club in terms of the maybe quality of player at his disposal, in terms of the ownership structure and their ambition, that it was a step forward. But that then brings added expectancy and added, scrutiny on him and what he's trying to do. And thus far, he hasn't been able to bridge. He wants us to sort of buy into the fact it took him time at Bristol, and it did take him time, absolutely. But, reading Chris's point there, I think, it loops back round to me for, if they had 8 points from 9, let's put it that way. If we had 8 points from 9, but you could see what they were doing in those 9 games, there was a common thread. There was that control of midfield areas. You had a player like Jacob Wright in that team. You had players around him, maybe to offset what he doesn't offer you in terms of central midfield, out of possession. You had a defensive structure which felt there was a good blend, a good balance. There wasn't that fear, like with a Medic, that the ball in behind and pace exposes them. You don't look at Kellen Fisher playing on the left-hand side of a defence and feel, well, he's a bit of a square peg in a round hole there, as he was for that West Brom goal at Carrow Road, as he got turned that night. If you didn't have those conflictions, then for me personally, you'd row with it a little bit, because you could see that there was something positive, that the results will turn and then they'll go on. But at the moment, what is there in the performance levels over the 9 games? Yes, there's been elements of each, well, maybe not each game, but a lot of those games you could say, well, that is okay, that is a nice identifiable style, and you can see what they're trying to do. And maybe with further development and players understanding their roles and the demands of Liam Manning and his coaching staff, they draw that out of them, and it then tips performance into results. But let's be honest, I mean, over those 9 games, I don't think there's been too much to get optimistic about in terms of the style of play, in terms of what Liam Manning is trying to do with these players. And that, when push comes to shove, comes down to him and his coaching staff, and maybe what they're not doing in terms of coaching. Because what we see is based on the 90 minutes every game, and does that look like a group of players who are being well coached, who understand what this head coach is asking of them? For me, it's not.
No, I think that's fair enough, and you've highlighted a lot of the issues there. But you also said that you've seen positive signs in the West Brom and Ipswich performances, and I think I have too. So we've got a lot of questions about sort of the broader picture and Ben Knapper and things like that. I promise we will get to those, but given this is the preview show, we should probably briefly touch at least on the game and sort of how it pans out, because you reference what kind of went well with the performance in those couple of games, and I do think, although I can completely understand why this is the case, I do think maybe that's been brushed over a little bit in terms of the levels of performance. Now, in the context of a team that wants to get promoted to the Premier League, I don't think it's anything special, but I think we have seen more of the proactivity that Manning likes to talk about, more of the high pressing, and certainly more of Norwich in the opposition half. So, looking at that, I think that was maybe my sole reason for feeling optimistic for Norwich going into this weekend. But then over the international break, there's the bad news that Jose Cordoba is the latest in a long line of muscular injuries. He's picked up a hamstring issue that Manning says will keep him out at least until the international break. Now, this is where I think one of the big tactical problems comes in for Manning this weekend, because you asked him at that press conference whether he feels he can play in the same way, whether they can press high without somebody with that pace in the back line. You referenced earlier as well how, somebody like Jakov Medic has been exposed a few times with balls in behind, and maybe his lack of athleticism when they try to play that way. But Manning did say he felt he had the options and he didn't want to change anything. But I mean, he can say that, but do you think it's possible with some of the options they have? I mean, he's choosing from basically Rory McConville and Jakov Medic. He said Shane Duffy won't quite be ready for this one. And neither of those, I think, has anywhere near the same levels of pace that Cordoba has to kind of push high in the pitch and be able to leave that space in behind and then allow the attacking players to go and press. So as much as Manning says it's possible, do you think it is for them to play in the same way that they did against West Brom and Ipswich, against Bristol City this weekend when they don't have Cordoba at their disposal?
Well, the honest answer is no. If we're looking, we're isolating out the defensive unit within the overall template of how he's going to set them up and what personnel he's going to go with, then no, Jakov Medic is not, in terms of a profile of centre-back, offering you the same ability to almost, bail yourself out. I mean, we saw it a few times against Ipswich where they slid those balls down the channel for a Broadhead or a Smodic, and just his natural athleticism and that pace got Norwich out of trouble. He could go and track back and win that foot race and then, tidy up and put a fire out there. Now, if that's Medic in the same situation, sadly, we've seen it already. Watford in the League Cup, there was 1 or 2, Millwall on the opening day at Carrow Road in the league, where in similar scenarios he was found wanting. That isn't his strongest attribute, and that's being kind to him as well. So, no, if he comes in alongside Darling and they play that high line, and then Bristol are able to counter with pace in behind, then you do fear, because Darling isn't especially quick either, but he covers the ground a bit easier than Medic. And I think probably the answer lies not so much in what's the like-for-like defensive option for Cordoba, because there isn't one that I see. If we're focusing in on that pace and athleticism element and recovery ability, it's probably going to have to be more within the context of what he goes with in midfield, because if you're going to try and mask a lack of pace with Jakov Medic in that regard, then one way you could do that is by getting players in the middle of the park who are comfortable in taking the ball in, retaining possession, setting a tempo, and shifting it out of those danger areas where Bristol could counter on them. And for me, that's a player like Jacob Wright. Maybe it's Matson as well. I thought admittedly, he didn't cover himself in glory for the Philogene strike in terms of coughing up possession, but I thought overall at Portman Road, he looked like one who had a bit more to his game than simply a breaker-upper and give it to somebody else. So, can he do that role? And I guess if you're Manning, Kenny McLean comes into the equation clearly. So that, for me, on this point, is probably where they need to go in a post sort of Cordoba absence period, which is clearly going to be probably not until December, until we see him taking up what Liam Manning was inferring. He said not this side of the next international break. Well, that effectively is the last week of November. And you wouldn't have thought he could drop him in cold, so he's going to need some time, even if he was getting to a point where he could be available again by the back end of that international window. So, I'm looking at where are we now? We're mid-October. For the next 6 weeks or so, you're probably without Jose Cordoba. It's a massive test in terms of what is the answer. Is it, as he might have inferred midweek, Shane Duffy beyond this weekend? My sense is that probably is where he's looking now, because you obviously get with Duffy, you get a bit more experience, a bit more championship nous. And I think if you're Liam Manning, you're probably looking at it. You're looking at the success of Darling, and you probably feel you need that in this period, particularly just to steady the ship. You need players who've been around the block. And I'm not saying Shane Duffy is the answer mid to longer term, but in the here and now, he's probably going to give you a level of consistency that maybe some of those other options alongside Darling won't at this stage. So, but it's not ideal, and it cuts to the heart for me of maybe the areas of the recruitment that wasn't right. That we're a Jose Cordoba injury away now from seemingly not having another viable alternative in terms of the centre-back profile he wants to play, the type of game he wants, which is that evidently that higher line, squeeze the play, condense the play, and then trust you've got athletic enough defenders to cover in behind when the need arises. It shouldn't really have got to the point where Jose Cordoba picks up an injury and then you're scrambling around. So, again, that probably does shine a bit of a negative light on terms of the recruitment that they did in the summer. And also maybe, letting a player like Brad Hills go.
Yeah, and you spoke about how the solution to that might be midfielders who maybe are a little bit more comfortable on the ball. And I think one of the themes of the last couple of weeks as well has been Jacob Wright, and whether it's time for him to come back into the lineup. Obviously, I think it's 4 games now that he hasn't played, even though, that's been how long he's been available since returning from a red card against Middlesbrough, which feels now like a long, long time ago. So a good while since Norwich fans have seen him in the midfield. I think in that type of scenario, there's always the danger of diagnosing whoever's not been in the team as the solution to all the problems. I don't think Jacob Wright will solve all of their problems, to be honest. But when you talk about players who are a little bit more comfortable on the ball, who can take it in and can maybe help Liam Manning in that sense, I think he's a good example. And we've had a couple of comments already today about whether now might be the time to bring Wright back in. Nick saying one of the issues is that they don't seem to be able to grasp control in the middle of the park. And, Wright maybe is somebody who could help regain that. Kevin saying surely Jacob Wright has to get in this Saturday. I know you wrote a column about him a few days ago as well, Paddy. So does it feel to you like, you spoke about some of those midfield options, but does it feel like Jacob Wright is in with at least a decent shout of coming back into the 11 against Bristol City?
I'll be honest, I don't feel that's probably where Liam Manning is going with this. And just because of the type of, again, drawing a parallel with Bristol, he had Wright, he said he had Bird and Knight in his centre midfield. I wouldn't classify them as a similar type of profile to Jacob Wright. The counter to that, of course, is at the start of this season, Millwall, Middlesbrough, one or two of them early away games, he actually went with Jacob Wright, which told me that, he'd seen enough encouragement over the pre-season that he felt that he was ready for that responsibility in the centre of the park. And, it wasn't Liam Manning who got himself foolishly sent off against Middlesbrough and off the back of that 3-game ban. But thereafter, with the ongoing issues they've had in terms of lack of control in midfield areas, not to have kicked a ball in the next 4 games is very puzzling for me, given that he trusted him at the start of the season. So what's changed there? It can't simply be that Matson's come in, Topic has been in and out of the side, McLean's been in and out of the side. So there's been no real settled blend in the centre of the park with those other 3 players. So you would have thought over this 4 games, at some point, Jacob Wright would have got a little turn. But, we will see tomorrow, obviously. That won't prejudge where Liam Manning's head's at. But I didn't come away from Colney midweek and thought that he was of a mind that he's going to accommodate Jacob Wright in his central midfield. It felt to me it's going to be more of the same. It's going to be a McLean, it's going to be a Mats, and maybe with Topic thrown in there. And if so, and they're similarly lacking in control across midfield areas, then it's going to add to this particular debate, because he is the things he isn't in terms of central midfield, but what he is very much is comfortable technically on the ball, taking the ball in tight areas, playing on the half turn, connecting players in wide areas. All of those elements we saw in that very fertile period towards the back end of last season in an otherwise downward decline, which claimed obviously Johannes and Glenn and Jack Wiltshire, maybe indirectly. But so we know he's got that in him. We know he's come through that Man City finishing school. So, technically you want a player to try and get on the ball and control the tempo. He's your man. And I only go back to, I know he got sent off in the second half against Middlesbrough, but I'm still struggling to think of a better half at Carrow Road, and it's a very small sample, granted, than that first half against Middlesbrough when it was Topic and it was Wright, and Norwich actually had control. They had territorial control. They were moving the ball very well, and they were causing Middlesbrough a lot of problems. Obviously, the wheels came off in the second half, and the rest is history. But I don't recall since Norwich have had quite as much poise. Maybe West Brom, you could argue, but I think Middlesbrough are a far superior outfit to West Brom. Let's get it straight. So even against a very good team in Middlesbrough, a Topic and right axis was giving them that platform. So for me, I wouldn't mind seeing that tomorrow. I'll like one at you, Sam. Where do you think he's going to go with central midfield-wise tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, really. I can see why why fans are calling for Wright, and particularly when you look at players in that midfield who are comfortable in possession, and also the fact that, to be honest, they've tried a lot of different midfields, and I don't think many of them have worked so far this season. I can see why a lot of people would want him in there, but ultimately, the popular opinion isn't going to be the one that decides Norwich City's starting 11 tomorrow. It's going to be what Liam Manning makes of the start to the season so far, and who he sees in there. And I think, as you said, you look at that Bristol City team throughout the whole time he was there. Basically, it was a two that was very mechanical, that was physical, had a lot of running power, and although they were technically decent, I don't think there was any particular focus on just getting players who were decent in possession and would be able to dominate games. So I think you look at what Manning wants, what he's done at Bristol City, what he's chosen so far at Norwich, and the sort of players that they've recruited. I'm not sure Wright is particularly in that mould for Manning, unless he does decide to change the sort of the style of play a little bit, which I don't see happening this weekend. So I think Pelle Mattsson is probably a shoe-in. I think he's maybe the first choice in midfield at the moment, and for me, that's justified when you look at his performances so far. And then the other one is kind of the mystery. I could still see it being Kenny McLean again. You look at how desperate they were for him to be involved against Ipswich, how they've kind of been shoving him into the team even when he's been struggling with this back issue over the last few weeks. And even though for me he hasn't been quite at the levels that we've seen from him at times in the last couple of years, I think it's clear to see that Manning really rates him. And when you look at his profile at his best, he probably does sort of fit with what Manning's gone for previously as well. So I could see McLean slotting in alongside Mattsson, who Manning again praised before the Ipswich game, and clearly would have been pleased with for the majority of that one, apart from the Jadon Philogene goal as you referenced. So I could see that being the midfield too. And as much as I can see fans quite desperate for Jacob Wright to come in, ultimately right now he hasn't even been making substitute appearances for Manning. So I'd be surprised, but I don't think anything's completely off the table. And clearly his faith at the start of the season suggests that he's someone who Manning does see some potential in, but obviously he's not really right at the forefront of his thinking right now. So it'll be interesting to see what he does do with that midfield. I did say earlier we'd come back onto some of those maybe boardroom issues, and a lot of people talking about Ben Knapper, things like that. This is probably a good way to bridge it between the game and what's going on sort of above Liam Manning. Paul has asked, I hope it doesn't come to this as I like Manning, but do you think a 2-3-0 loss could be the end for him? That was actually a question that Annie, the Bristol City fan I spoke to, asked me, and I think there is this perception that maybe this could be the end. I said personally that if you don't sack him after the first loss to Ipswich Town in 16 years, when you've got an international break to replace him, then probably your head isn't particularly close to sacking him in the first place. So although I think it could be very toxic in this kind of situation, for me it would be probably a little bit earlier. I don't see them doing it personally, but what are your thoughts on it, Paddy? Do you think it could be the end for Manning if it goes particularly poorly tomorrow?
Well, those two words, Sam, for me, particularly poorly. How do we define that? Is it, Wrexham levels of heads gone, whatever that actually ends up as the final score. But if it's that almost, this is a rabble we're watching here now, then the reaction, as we said in the earlier part of the broadcast today, I think that will dictate a lot of the what if in terms of him and his status moving forward. I just get the sense it's a big week. I think that's probably, you speak to anybody inside the football club, and they probably look at it in similar terms. And by that I mean it's Bristol, and then it's Swansea, Derby, and then Swansea, too, for different reasons. Not the easiest of away assignments, but the way things are going at the minute it's been shown that they're certainly picking up results away from home. They maybe do prefer being away from home at the moment, so that might not be the most, in terms of roadmap this coming week of the 3 games to come, they might prefer it that way around. But to emerge the other side of those three, you haven't won, let's say hypothetically, they haven't won any of those 3 games. If it's worse than that in terms of the sort of 0 and 6 at Carrow Road in terms of competitive games, then what is there at that point? And you might argue what is there right now, but certainly at that point, you'd be 12 league games in. That's a sizable sample. And if we're still talking around all these issues that we're talking around in terms of result is one thing, but the performance or lack of, seemingly players not on board or not understanding this kind of mantra that he keeps pushing about empowering players. He doesn't want to paint by numbers and tell them what they need to do. I mean, it might call for that at the moment because, this kind of, the ceiling is higher, to paraphrase what he says, if players that can decode it in real time and they don't need to be looking to the sidelines. I can see that logic, but in the here and now, it's whatever levers he can pull to actually get results, and he knows that. I mean, there'll be plenty of people who already think like that. And that's before, the potential for it to go badly wrong again at Carrow Road. So, you'd be naive if you're inside the football club not to know that feeling is there. It's growing week to week. To run counter to that, we've had dialogue with fans on various electronic forms over this period, and they're not putting this solely at Liam Manning's door. It's Chris Sutton's column in the week. You change Manning, what changes? That's like 4 or 5 head coaches' turns of the wheel since Farker, and further forward. So there's obviously bigger issues. There's bigger structural issues. I don't think anybody dispute that. But equally, he is front and centre. It's him directly what's happening or not happening on the pitch, and he will be, in terms of the accountability chain, very difficult for him to push back on if the product on the pitch isn't where it needs to be 12 games in, for example, and there's still, because let's be honest, if they don't pick up a win in these next 3, in very real terms, they could be in the bottom 3. And you might say, well, that's neither here nor there at, what would it be, back end of October. But it certainly maybe, for me, would signal that, well, forget about any top 6 aspirations or top 10 aspirations. It'll be staying in the division. And what a sad indictment that would be on everybody involved at that football club. If you started the season badged as we're going to have a real good crack at the Premier League, and within 2 to 3 months, it's looking over your shoulder and trying to stave off League One.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for that, a lot of the blame would unfortunately go to Ben Knapper, who actually some of the people in the chat are saying is maybe more culpable than Liam Manning. I mean, you referenced the Chris Sutton's column and the fact that it does feel like there's a broader problem, and that you can't just keep sacking the head coach and expect that to be kind of the silver bullet. So I wanted to ask you kind of how responsible Ben Knapper is for things. We've had a couple of comments. Chris Andrews says it's not Manning, it's Knapper. Charlie Cook, it's Knapper at this point. Changing the manager will do nothing. Do you kind of agree with that assessment? I mean, it could be, to be fair, both. I mean, it feels like a lot of this debate is it's one or the other. It could be that, obviously time will tell. It could be that Liam Manning isn't the right head coach for Norwich City, and Ben Knapper also isn't the right sporting director for Norwich City. But when we look solely at Liam Manning for these things, disregarding all the recruitment that Ben Knapper did, the fact that he was the one who got rid of Johannes Torup very early on in what was supposed to be a long-term project. Does it feel to you like maybe Ben Knapper is as culpable, if not more, than Liam Manning in this situation?
I mean, the reality is it's not a binary thing, is it? It's various individuals would all be, if this doesn't improve, culpable. But you can debate until the cows come home who shoulders the bigger weighting of responsibility in that scenario. I guess it depends where your primary focus is. If it's kind of what we see on the park or don't see on the park, then Liam Manning, for me, and his coaching staff have to take more of the responsibility. But the broader brushstrokes of the direction of travel, the recruitment, things like the recovery of players, which clearly Manning is now very frustrated about. That hasn't been resolved. That predates him. That goes back to last season, particularly. We spoke to Ben Knapper about that in the summer. They were, the suggestion was they're going to do this audit. They're going to, make the changes necessary, and they'll get through that. Well, here we are with however many muscular type injuries this early in the season, And Liam Manning, by his measure, not anything we have to say on the matter, he doesn't feel they've got to the bottom of that. That's clearly the chain of command for that leads all the way to Ben Knapper's door. So as the recruitment does, if you're questioning the recruitment, not maybe so much this summer window, because you need probably a longer body of time to make decisions, but some of the players who came in last summer, some of the players who came in January, as has already been discussed, Rory McConville has gone from he's the poster boy for what we want to build here, so he can't get a kick. And it looks seemingly like as soon as Shane Duffy is fit and available, he'll be even lower down the pecking order. The Jurasek episode, we could go on. So yeah, I don't think there's any definitive answer we can give in terms of who's to blame for this. I think that, as Liam Manning himself said midweek, they're in this together as a football club, whether it's Mark Attanasio, Norfolk Holdings, whether it's Ben Knapper and the executive committee, whether it's Liam Manning and his coaching staff, whether it's the players. I don't think you can separate out any of those constituencies and really put the blame at anybody's or any department's door. But when push comes to shove, like I keep saying, then the buck has to stop with Ben Knapper. He is the sporting director. He's made the appointment, firstly for Torup, actually before that, to get rid of Wagner, then to bring in Torup, now to bring in Manning. That's all Ben Knapper's doing. So in terms of the footballing side of this club, that's Ben Knapper. Yeah, absolutely. And, as I said to him after the decision to get rid of Torup and pre-Manning coming in the door, I said, well, that's effectively questioning your judgment. You get this wrong as well, then your judgment is further questioned and eroded, certainly in terms of the eyes of the fan base. And he, to give him his due on that one, he wasn't trying to downplay that. He knows that this Liam Manning experiment is now probably a defining moment for him in terms of his sporting director role here at Norwich City. Because if they have to pull up the drawbridge on the Manning head coach episode, then where does that leave Ben Knapper, the guy who's effectively in the space of, what would that be? That would be April, May time last year. So if it happens this side of Christmas, in the space of 6 months, he's had to get rid of 2 head coaches that he handpicked and recommended to Mark Attanasio. These are the 2 guys to take us forward. It's not a great look on his CV, is it? And as a result, I think he would find himself on very thin ice.
Yeah, indeed he would. And I think, as you say, even though we probably can't predict based, just now, whether what happens against Bristol City will decide things in a definite way, it does feel either way like it's a big game for both Liam Manning and for Ben Knapper's futures at Norwich City. But if we just sort of bring it back round to this weekend's game, I think Bristol City have obviously started the season okay. I think some of their fans have been reasonably pleased, given there was obviously the upheaval of Manning leaving Ashton Gate, Gerhard Struber coming in. He's gone with a bit more of a continuity approach, as I think we're seeing a lot of successful managers take when they've come in to replace players. They've got quite a lot of injuries, which maybe is the main problem for them going into this one. I think their midfield, particularly, and some of their better players in there, has been harmed by that. So that might give Norwich fans some hope. But for me, it still feels like the sort of game where, if you want to get promoted, and admittedly right now that feels like a long, long way away. But again, the expectation has been communicated that the Norwich want to get in the playoffs. They expect to be in and around the playoffs. They've certainly spent enough money to be in and around the playoffs. Next year, at the end of the season. This is the sort of game at home against Championship opposition, who to me feel like they'll be at most competing for a playoff place, probably in and around mid-table somewhere for me. Even with all the context, you look at their expectations, this is a sort of game that probably Norwich should be winning if they are to achieve, and again, I know this is a long way away, but to achieve what they want to at the end of the season.
Yeah, but as you're saying that to me, Sam, I'm just having a look at Norwich's. I mean, one win in 8. Norwich going into this game on 1 win in 8, and that was Blackburn 2-0 away. Feels a long time ago. That was the last time Josh Sargent scored. I punched up a quote earlier on. We maybe get into that before the end about how they turned around Josh Sargent's, goal drought's probably a bit extreme, but 5 games He's not getting a huge amount of chances. But anyway, I digress. So, your context is right, because that's what we've been told that this season is going to be benchmarked against. But the reality is that is the form line of that team who run out at Carrow Road tomorrow into a very febrile atmosphere, maybe. Certainly one that could turn if things start to go against them on the pitch. 1 win in 8. That's so far removed from a team with any sort of top 6 genuine aspiration. So for me, I must be honest, I don't really put Bristol in the bracket. Yeah, hard to disagree. I don't really put Bristol in the top 6 bracket. I think they did overachieve last season. I think it was certainly 5th and 6th positions in terms of the points it took to get in there. It was pretty low historically. That's to take nothing away from that achievement. First time in 17 years at that level they got in there. But you have to be honest and think there's better squads in the division who I would put ahead of Bristol when it comes to maybe the runners and riders for the top 6. But, their form is better going into this game, albeit not much better. I'm counting it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2 wins in 9. So it's a team with 1 win in 8 against a team with 2 wins in 9. Yeah. So that doesn't scream that this is a top 6 aspirational battle at Carrow Road. I think it's going to be one where hopefully Josh Sargent comes to the party. They can get him sufficient service that he can show what we all think he is, which is the best striker in the division of his type, and that they can just by hook or by crook, in a very watching through the fingers type of affair, where there's so much that isn't perfect about that performance, but they get the job done. And then he's got some respite to go into Derby and Swansea away. And to be honest, it might take a little bit more than that now. They might need to show a little bit more in terms of performance, but you just think a line in the sand is what's required at Carrow Road, just to give him some respite, give the club in general, maybe even the fan base, who I think you can imagine, you can't blame them, are sick and tired of just turning up there to watch a team who not only aren't able to put a result together, but not seemingly put some structure on the pitch into what they're trying to do. Because there's no way, without any hint of arrogance, that Norwich, this stage in the season, should be 0-5 at Carrow Road. I mean, that tells you something top to bottom is wrong to produce those sort of numbers. So for those reasons, however it happens tomorrow, if they can just get a win, and then, the debates around, directions of travel and is he the right person? Is Ben Knapper the right person? Are there changes needed to be made in and around the football club more generally? All of that at least will be put for tomorrow, rather than, we can actually savour a positive experience at Carrow Road, because there hasn't been too many of them this season. Or, to take that last comment, predate Manning, 2025 at Carrow Road has been, well, certainly from the point where it started to turn south under Torop, it's been pretty unedifying, really. If you're a Norwich fan, if you're a Norwich season ticket holder, and it'd just be nice that they could turn up tomorrow and watch their team win a game of football. It's not much to ask.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it feels now like, I think we have had some comments saying they want to see a performance even more than a result, but I've got to say, I think with the mood the way it is right now, I think Manning would take the worst possible performance and a 1-0 win tomorrow. So I think it does feel like it's all about that. We are going to come to score predictions shortly, so get those in the comments and we'll flash those up. But Paddy, you talked about Josh Sargent, and I wanted to ask you about him just before we kind of go. We've got a comment from A2B, who I think is a Bristol City fan, who says, "We leave gaps, Sargent will get chances tomorrow." And I think if he does, that will be huge news for Norwich City, because, as you said, for anyone else, it feels like drought territory would be harsh, but he scored 6 goals in his first 5 games of the season, hasn't scored any goals in his last 5. So Norwich really need to get him firing again. I think there's a bit of a debate going on about whose fault it is, whether it's the lack of service, whether it's Sargent dropping off the system, whether it's Liam Manning's fault for not getting him in the right positions. I think personally it's probably a mixture of all three. The lack of chance creation for me is probably the main culprit, but I do also think in terms of his own personal performances, we aren't seeing the same kind of levels that we were at the start of the season, albeit 6 goals in 5 games is a ridiculous ratio to try to keep up. But I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on how Norwich can potentially get him back on the score sheet and get him back in the right positions to be scoring goals, because it feels like, as much as they shouldn't be as reliant on him as they are that reliant, and really they need him to be scoring if they're to be scoring any goals. So if you were Liam Manning, what would be the route back to that, and what would you be trying to do more of to get Josh Sargent back on the score sheet?
Well, I mean, on this very topic, we did ask him on Wednesday at Colney. We'll push the quotes out a bit later on today, and his answers suggested that we're talking around a topic that him and his coaching staff have spent a lot of time over this past 2 weeks or so, and sounded like, because he didn't get called up for the US, he's been at Colney. It felt like maybe they've done a bit of work on the grass as well to try and put him back into the positions on the pitch where he can do most damage. I mean, that's the most telling thing for me. You look at, certainly in that 5-game block where he hasn't scored, he's doing as much work almost in his own defensive third penalty area than he is touches-wise in the attacking third / attacking penalty area. That cannot be right for a player with his goal-scoring record at this level. He looks frustrated to me, quite rightly. He's having to drop deeper and deeper. I mean, what was his primary role at Portland Road? It was trying to battle Kipre and his mates to win flick-ons for Antti Cernach in the middle of the Ipswich half, so far away from the goal. I don't recall. I think he had one shot he might have dragged at the keeper. But, you look at his stats over the course of this season, he's averaging just under 2 shots a game, which, Gerd Muller levels of productivity would be required to score goals from so few chances. So for me, it's all about the service, what isn't happening. Liam Manning in that answer talked about the West Brom game, where structurally they were better with that high line that meant the midfielders were further forward, as was Sargent and the people around him, Marcondes that night primarily. And he looked to be at least operating in more promising areas of the football pitch, but Liam Manning thought that the service was a bit sporadic from wide areas. There wasn't too much getting played through. I'd like personally to see Marcondes renew that partnership with him that we saw against West Brom, because that looked to me the least isolated, probably since Chris Garden came out the side with injury, that he's been. So for me, Marcondes has to play tomorrow and be in and around Sargent, because he is the type of player who can link. If you've got a midfield and a defence playing slightly higher, then he can link players to get in and around Sargent and get the type of service he needs, which, we've seen it. We've seen it even in a small sample this season. Go back to that Middlesbrough goal. It was Kenny McLean, ball over the top, and he's gone down the sides of the fullback centre-back, running into the box, where he's devastating in those areas. Not with his back to goal, trying to fight centre-backs. That's not where you're going to get the most out of Josh Sargent. So for me, it's less about him, but I do take Liam's point that this 2 weeks is probably, and without the travel, of course, involved in going back to America, that's got to have had a positive impact in terms of he's had some time to recharge, maybe, if he was feeling a little bit leggy, a little bit weary, and who could blame him, the burden he's had to shoulder this season. So personal element of that, yes, that might improve his moving forward now, his performance levels. But I think the bigger issue has been wrapping around him the type of service and the type of creative players that can get him in the positions to do what he does best, which is score goals at this level.
Definitely, and I think when you've got Mirko Topic as your number 10, that probably doesn't help as a striker. So I think probably being at home gives Manning more of an opportunity, maybe to get a Marcondes in and around him. I saw a suggestion that I flashed up as well that Makama maybe would be the man to do that. We've seen Ante Cernach play that role, so it'll be interesting to see if Manning can get someone a little bit closer to him, just helping him out and trying to create those chances. I think that will be a big part of it for Norwich. We're going to come on to score predictions, and when you're talking about yours, Paddy, I'm gonna show some of our viewers' predictions. But personally, I'm gonna go for a 1-1. I think Norwich will just about get their first point at home, which almost certainly won't be enough to satiate those fans who are desperate to see a first win. I think a win is the only way really to properly turn around the feeling at the moment, but with neither team in the best form, I think Norwich might just eke out a first point. of the season at home. I don't see it being a particularly exciting one, but yeah, I can see 1-1. What do you think, Paddy?
I'd incline to agree with you, Sam. Yeah, I think. I mean, and that when you're saying using the phrase "eke out" at home, first point. I mean, that underlines for me how deep this trough is at the moment. I mean, yeah, exactly. For a lot of people, that won't be enough, I'm sure, and it will certainly do nothing to change their maybe views on Manning, maybe those around him as well in that football club. But in terms of moving it into the next week, at least it would be a bridge to try and move it on again. Yeah, Charlie thinks an away win. I think I'm going to err on the side, unusually for me, positivity here, and I'm going to say Norwich 2-1. I think for all the reasons we've stated in this last hour, this is big. This is big now in the context of Liam Manning, in context of Norwich's season, in context of what they've not done at Carrow Road. That surely, even in the context of post-Ipswich, and Liam Manning touched on that disappointment that lingered around the group for quite a few days after, almost to the point where he had to say, look, lads, it's right to feel disappointed and angry and frustrated, but we need to put it behind us, get our heads down and change the narrative. And that's only by now the next opportunity being Bristol. So I'm going to go with that. 2-1 Norwich, Sargent the winner.
Let's hope you're right then, and I'm wrong. It's certainly going to be an interesting one, and it feels like a really big one for Liam Manning and Ben Knapper and everyone at Norwich City, really, after what's been a very difficult couple of weeks. Obviously, that Ipswich loss, the controversy over the Carrow Road developments, and things like that. It feels like a really, really big one for Norwich. Whether it's decisive, obviously there are a lot of questions about that, and a lot of blame going around in different directions. I think Norwich have the opportunity to settle it just a little bit tomorrow, and if they can do that, I'm sure Liam Manning would be relieved, because I think he's been very open about the fact that he's absolutely desperate to get off the mark at home, and I'm sure he's keen to put more points on the board with Norwich in a perilous position in the Championship table. Thanks very much for joining me, Paddy. Thanks everyone for watching today. Of course, if you've missed any of it, then you can catch up by going back to the start of the video, and it will remain on this, on all of these social channels, wherever you're joining us. If you want more, then pinken.com/subscribe. The place to go if you haven't already for all of our content going into this weekend's game, where of course we'll have all of your usual coverage. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you for the next one, hopefully with a bit more positive feeling after a win against Bristol City.